Is that a waterfall up there?
Yeah, big one. And that's a couple 100 feet high. And whole canyon 600 feet deep.
Have you been up there?
Yeah, that's a cool place.
Huh.
Yeah, you can see everything around the volcano there.
Yeah, and all this just scoured.
Steve, it's absolutely beautiful here. That's just the peaceful, quiet, and almost overwhelming beauty. And yet, it wasn't always that way.
On May 18, 1980, a catastrophic geologic event occurred that not only shocked the world by its explosive power, but it challenged the way we're thinking about the origin of the Earth at its very foundation. That event is the eruption of this mountain here in Washington State 35 years ago.
So Steve, tell us about that. What happened on that day?
The eruption on May 18th was really a 9-hour event. And if you think about the 9-hour event, there were 7 different sub-events that were going on during that big event on May 18th. 17 seconds after 8:32 in the morning, there was a big earthquake, magnitude 5.1. It shook the north slope of the mountain. The oversteepened and cracked north slope began to slide, and it formed this gigantic rock fall that became mixed with atmosphere and gas and dispersed, and it became a debris avalanche. And this debris avalanche overtopped this ridge and went 10 miles from the volcano. And then behind that avalanche, the pressure inside the volcano was released, and super hot liquid water in the neck of the volcano expanded to steam, and it created this gigantic steam explosion, equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT blast energy. That was directed not up, but northward over the landscape. And then we had the debris avalanche going into Spirit Lake, and the avalanche displaced the water of the lake up to 860 feet, creating this enormous or giant water wave on the lake. And then following that were mud flows. The heat of the explosion melted the snow and the ice around the volcano, and we had mud flows on 6 major rivers downstream. And then we had pyroclastic flows, especially on the afternoon of May 18th. The volcano erupted episodically, these frothed up liquid flows that came out. And then the rest of the day, there was airfall debris, and we call that the pumice that fell out of the atmosphere. We call that airfall tephra. So that's the kind of the story of the 9-hour eruption on May 18th in summary.
There was a lot going on that day.
Yes.
Steve, when we were walking up here, you were telling me that before 1980, if we looked down there, we would see a lush forest, but it's a whole lot lower than what we see. This has all been filled in. What happened? How did all the material get here, and what do we learn from it?
Well, we have a lot of deposits, don't we? There's up to 600 feet of deposits here in this valley. It was sky before the eruption, and now look what's going on down there. Okay, that is an amazing thing, just thinking about that. So a lot of deposition, up to 600 feet of deposits. And then the way the erosion has occurred in this area, it allows the layers to be exposed. And so we can see the sequence of events that formed not just this ridge, but the valley. Some of these events occurred as much as 2 or 3 years after the 1980 eruption. And so every event left a fingerprint of something here on the landscape. So we have Earth's newest landscape, and we have all the knowledge from eyewitnesses and from photographs to put together the sequence of events here at the volcano.
So we have mud flows, we have pyroclastic flows, we have these explosion pits, we have erosion, and we look out here and we see there's a lot of character to this land.
Yes.
But it all occurred rapidly through these catastrophic events.
Yes.
What does that tell a geologist who now moves their vision from what happened here at Mount St. Helens and then begins to look around the world at the geological formations that we have around the world?
That's my story, is I came here and I'm looking around elsewhere, and I see the application of erosion and deposition and those kind of processes that are here at the volcano to many other features of the Earth's surface. I have studied strata, and rapid strata formation here indicates rapid strata formation elsewhere. And rapid erosion features here are like erosion features that we thought require millions of years. And we thought that layers form slowly and gradually, but here at the volcano, they form rapidly.
What's the primary difference between your observations as you see here and the standard geological story, and what is that?
The standard geologic story is the present is the key to the past. We look at the present day process of slow and gradual, and then we think into that. That applies to geologic features of the Earth generally. But it really isn't the story. It's not the present is the key to the past, it's the catastrophic event is the key to the past. And so Mount St. Helens is a window to help us understand the catastrophic formations elsewhere on the Earth. So the present is not the key to the past, the catastrophic event that we're seeing is the key to the past.
Well, Steve, thanks for making me hike down here. This is an awesome place. Where are we?
We're on the North Fork of the Toutle River, upstream near the crater of Mount St. Helens, and we're in this area that's been profoundly impacted by the deposition and erosion associated with the volcanic eruption of 1980.
So are you saying that the ground we're standing on was not here 40 years ago?
Yeah, this was sky before the eruption in 1980. And so up to 600 feet of deposits have formed here. We just see the upper 100 feet of layers here. But
it's now been carved out for us so that we can look at it. You know, we can see some of those layers. And what do we see? What are we looking at?
Well, we're looking at mostly the bottom of the cliff over here. We're looking at the airfall deposit from May 18, 1980.
Is that the lower level that we see?
Yeah, the lower level. It's kind of a massive and fragmental deposit. That's what was falling out of the atmosphere from the volcano late in the afternoon of May 18. Right around 4 o'clock in the afternoon is when the eruption subsided, and so that top of that layer there, about halfway up the cliff, is the last airfall debris from May 18, 1980. And then this area was impacted by buried ice. Underneath us was large glacial ice buried in the debris avalanche, and then what happens is steam is reaming a hole to the surface, and we're seeing a steam explosion occur in the coarse debris right about halfway up the cliff.
How long did that happen after May 18th?
The first week or so.
First week?
In the first week or so, there was a big pit here. It was 100 feet deep, it reamed out by steam. It was 2,000 feet long, 1,000 feet wide, and this gigantic pit was here. And then into that pit came the next deposits. On June 12th, 1980, about 9 p.m. to midnight, there was a big eruption of Mount St. Helens, another big eruption. And during that 3-hour period, there were enormous pyroclastic flows, high density, very hot slurries of volcanic ash that came out of the crater. This low area in the pit collected those volcanic ash layers. And so we see behind us, about halfway up the cliff to about 3/4 of the way up the cliff, we see a 25-foot thickness of layered volcanic ash. That's the pyroclastic flow deposit from June 12, 1980. And it formed just in the 3 hours there late in the evening. And then this pit sat here with the landslide debris and the other kinds of material, the volcanic ash all around it. And then mud flow of March 19th, 1982, that came down here at 90 miles an hour. It filled in this low area, the pit, with mud. And you're seeing the residue of the mud, about 25 feet in thickness there at the top of the cliff. As the mud came into this pit, it actually filled the pit with 100-foot thickness of mud. The pit was filled, and then what happened is the mud overtopped the debris dam that was downstream of here, and then it cut a spillway over the top of that dam, which cut back through here and gouged out the bottom of this pit and released the mud downstream. And so the canyon formed in a day. on March 19th, 1982, by the drainage of the mud in this big pit through the debris avalanche.
So you sit here and you look at the complexity of the geological formations, and it would be easy for someone, if we just blindfolded them, brought them down here and took the blindfold off, to look around and think, as a lot of people do, man, this is really, really old. Look at all these different layers and all of this stuff that's going on, and yet each of these layers is laid down rapidly within a day and breached within a day.
Yeah, so
That's amazing.
So although it's spread out over 2 years period, each of those individual events happens in just minutes or hours.
So we end up having a very complex geological formation here that was all done rapidly.
Yeah. You know, when I see thin layers, I think of slow and gradual sedimentation, one sand grain at a time, and that was my normal way of thinking. But here at the volcano, I learned that grains can segregate rapidly in layers by hurricanes, essentially. Those pyroclastic flows make thin layers in just seconds. And mud flows can move very fast, 90 miles an hour, and bring big boulders and lots of debris. And of course, they're very erosive. And so we see the power of these agents and the speed of these agents. And fortunately, because Mount St. Helens, I can understand those processes, and I can go elsewhere and see if I see the same thing.
Right. So you go around the world and you see those complex geological formations, and it's easy to see how rapidly they could have formed as well. Is that right?
Rapid stratification, rapid erosion. That's the story at Mount St. Helens, and it's the story around the world. I think there's plenty of application here to other geologic features of the Earth, and it's a wonderful laboratory for studying catastrophic process.
Steve, this is kind of an interesting place. What do we see here, and where'd it come from?
We're on the North Fork of the Toutle River, and we're looking upstream toward Mount St. Helens, and we see this major alluvial or mudflow deposit in this valley. This mudflow deposit ripped loose logs and all kinds of material that was in the valley, cut it down, and then filled it back up with mud.
So where did it come from originally?
The mud is up from the blast zone, essentially. And there's 150 square miles of blown down trees up there. And the ash and the sediment debris that's ripped loose, there was a major source of sediment. Not just volcanic ash, but also the landscape itself is very erosive and erodible. And here we are, tens of miles away from the base of the volcano. Some people thought they were safe in the valley this far away from the volcano. Their home was buried in mud. And
so there's a lot of destruction from this mud flow down even this far.
Yeah. On 6 major rivers downstream, on the North Fork of the Toutle River here, and 5 other major rivers, there was significant mud flow damage. Logging camps were overcome. Homes were buried. There were bridges washed away. There was more dollar damage from the mud flows than from the steam blast itself. And so you can imagine the threat that mud, how it's able to radically alter a landscape.
Well, other than giving us a more healthy fear for mud, what has a geologist learned? What have you learned from this? And especially, what does that then tell you about the rest of the world?
Yeah, we've learned how effective and how mobile and how easily transported mud is by studying the mud flows at Mount St. Helens and other things. So we did not appreciate the way that mud is able to move things. And it's like ketchup. It has a shear thinning rheology, and that mud is, once it gets moving, is very low friction. And it has in itself, the way it works, the ability to overcome barriers and by its momentum just erode things. And so this energy that has come back to our discussions of mud has proven very beneficial for the understanding of limestone layers. I can see the effects in limestones, how fossils are buried, sandstones with graded beds, and these coarse clastic layers called conglomerates with large pebbles floating in mud matrix. All of this has tremendous implications from the mud flow angle of looking at it.
So when I drive around and I see a lot of these sedimentary layers, I ought to be thinking more about how it used to be mud than the way I used to think of it.
Yeah, now geologists used to think about dilute flow. You know, the bottom of a creek is a dilute flow. It might be 5% sediment during a big flood going by. Okay, well, that type of flow, the sweeping action of the bottom of a creek, is not the major mode of sediment movement in the past, at least judging from the frequency of mud flows. Now, a mud flow is 50% sediment, 50% water. It's not a dilute mass, and so it has huge energy in just its momentum.
So we have a mud flow with a lot of sediment and material in it. How do we get from that to then the layers?
Yeah, well, mud can simply freeze by friction and de-water, and you know it's only 50% water, it's 50% sediment, so it's easy or somewhat easy for a mud flow to lose its momentum and just become very, very rapidly a sediment layer. And that shows up in the fossil record as some of these massive beds. But mud can also go through a process where it deposits sediment and then becomes a dilute fluid flow. What happens is, and that's what's observed here at Mount St. Helens, is the mud flow goes along, loses sediment at a low place like here, and then the sediment to water ratio, the water increases, and so we have dilute fluid flows that are very erosive, and that creates the familiar sandy layering that we know about in creek beds and other places. And that process is called flow transformation. A mud flow can resurrect itself into a tractive current, a sweeping action current. And when that happens, boy, you can make all kinds of sedimentary strata. So the understanding of that has really revolutionized geologists' understanding of how strata form.
When a mud flow itself, when it's still saturated with a lot of that material, can it be erosive itself?
Oh, it's very erosive. And that's what was observed here. Okay, the mud flows came by and they picked up bridges and just floated bridges down. Logs, everything, it floats, okay? And so an automobile floats on a mud flow. They freight things along, okay? And, you know, we chuckle at thinking about how mud moves things, and I'm sure the people involved in the disaster of the moving mud don't like what they're seeing, but it is obvious that we need to think this way about the process.
Can a mud flow also cut down rather than just go through bridges or collect bridges and so forth? Can it also cut down in below?
Yes, and now mud is seen to do that on the slopes of Mount St. Helens. The two canyons on the north slope of the volcano are very deep. Step Canyon is over 600 feet deep, eroded through solid rock, made by moving mud after the summer of 1980. And there's another canyon called Lewitt Canyon where it's over 100 feet deep, eroded through solid rock. 500-year-old lava flow. It didn't take tens of thousands of years to do that. It was basically mud moving down that channel very rapidly, plucking away and grabbing solid rock and excavating a canyon. There are people that say that today on the ocean floor, the main way that sediment moves in the ocean is by mud flows. They're concealed down there, and they think that mud flows can go 1,000 kilometers under the ocean, over the flat floor of the ocean. And so it may be even today, mud flows on a more regular basis than we think here at Mount St. Helens are making significant sedimentary deposits. So our world is more mud flow than ever.
That's really interesting.